Have you ever had a conversation with someone and felt like they weren't listening? Like maybe they didn't even care about what you had to say? Not so long ago, life was a bit like that for women in Canada. They weren't allowed to vote. And if they spoke out and voiced their opinions, they could even be sent to jail. It was a time when women had more fear and less freedom, more rules and fewer rights. But 5 courageous Albertan women came together and changed it all. How, you might ask? Over a cup of tea. That's right, a cup of tea. But more on that in a minute. Almost 100 years ago, Emily Murphy, Irene Parlby, Nellie McClung, Louise McKinney, and Henrietta Muir Edwards were fed up with the way things were. Emily Murphy was the first female magistrate in Canada and wanted to be appointed to the Senate. But since she was a woman, she wasn't eligible. The law at the time said it was a position for persons, a word which somehow didn't include women. The women who would become known as the Famous Five set out to change that. But since women were strongly discouraged from getting together and talking about politics, the Famous Five set up what they called pink teas. The name was a great disguise. People assumed that they were just having dainty tea parties, but in reality, they were planning their strategy to move forward gender equality in Canada. All the planning and work that occurred during the pink teas led to the Famous Five's first petition to the Supreme Court of Canada. It was not to be that easy. Their petition was rejected. But they weren't giving up. They decided to approach the highest possible court authority at the time, the Privy Council of England. And on October 18th, 1929, an amazing thing happened. The Famous Five's petition led to the ruling that women were included as persons under law. These 5 courageous women changed the course of history in Canada and the Commonwealth and paved the way for women to be considered equal in all aspects of life. Generations later, their actions continue to inspire Canadian women to be ambitious, adventurous, and famous. Today, the Famous Five Foundation works to create a society where every voice is heard, valued, and has the power to challenge and conquer injustice.
Well, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us today, Bien tout. We are absolutely thrilled to have the first virtual pink tea of 2024, and what an amazing panel we have for you today, a group of incredible women leaders. So to start off though, I would like us to take a moment to do our land acknowledgements. And so because we're coming from Vancouver and Kelowna and Calgary and Winnipeg and Ottawa and Montreal and the Maritimes, each of us has a slightly different land acknowledgement or a group of Indigenous leaders to say thank you to. But fundamentally, what reconciliation is about is figuring out how we can all live together, because we are all treaty people. We are all treaty people. And so it is upon each and every one of us the responsibility to figure out how best to go forward, how to build a better Canada. And I have great confidence that this will happen. My next pleasant responsibility is to introduce both the VIP guest host today, as well as the young woman who will be providing the formal, exciting introduction of Justice Obansawan. Dr. Candis Callison had a very successful career as a journalist, but decided intellectual approach to journalism was equally as valuable. And so she now is an associate professor at the University of British Columbia, and she's sharing her knowledge regarding both journalism and Indigenous studies, but also from a perspective of public policy. Such lucky students at UBC to have her as a professor. And there is more information on our website and in our notices about today's pink tea about her other achievements. But I will just end by recommending a book that she has written called Reckoning, Journalism's Limits and Possibilities. And this was written after she and the co-author interviewed journalists from across Canada and the United States, a very important topic. Today's introduction of our VIP guest speaker is done by a young woman who grew up in St. Boniface, but is now living in Montreal because she's a first-year law student at McGill. Her name is Candis Callison, and she's passionate about the law, and she's also a Loran Scholar, Loran. This is the Canadian equivalent of being a Rhodes Scholar. So this extraordinary young woman is on the way to being a major leader within Canada. And today she is provides the enthusiastic introduction to Justice Obonsawin, for which we are most grateful. So Candis, over to you, and thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here today with the honor of introducing our guest speaker, the Honorable Michelle Obonsawin, Justice on the Supreme Court of Canada. With a career spanning over 2 decades, the Honorable Michelle Obonsawin is a respected voice and member of Canada's legal community. In September 2022, Justice Obonsawin was appointed to the Supreme Court of Canada, making history as the first Indigenous person and woman to serve as a justice on Canada's highest court. As a woman myself, as a law student, and a future legal professional, seeing women from various backgrounds on Canada's highest court makes me feel empowered that someday I too can become a justice. In fact, for the first time ever, Canada's highest court is composed of 5 women, making it so that the majority of sitting judges on the Supreme Court of Canada are women. To put it short, the impact of representation must never be underestimated. Therefore, I'm beyond honored to be given the opportunity to introduce Justice Obonsawin. Justice Obonsawin's historic appointment to the Supreme Court of Canada is predated by her extraordinary legal career. In 2017, she was appointed to the Ontario Superior Court of Justice, which is located in Ottawa. Prior to that appointment, Justice Obonsawin was General Counsel for the Royal Ottawa Health Group, where she developed a comprehensive understanding of legal issues related to mental health and performed extensive research regarding the use of Gladue principles in the forensic mental health system. In addition to having taught Indigenous law at the University of Ottawa's Common Law program, Justice Obonsawin previously served on the Board of Governors of the University of Ottawa and as a board member for the Aboriginal Legal Services of the University of Ottawa's Legal Aid Clinic. Furthermore, Justice Obonsawin is a frequent guest speaker, speaking on various topics such as the Gladue principles, Indigenous issues, as well as mental health, labor, and privacy law. She's also an author of various publications, including the Mental Health Checklist, a guide for members of the judiciary. Finally, Justice Obonsawin is currently a partner judge for Afghanistan women judges with the International Association of Women Judges. Her dedication to justice and unwavering commitment to making a difference serves as an inspiration to us all. To put it simply, Justice Obonsawin's journey to the Supreme Court of Canada is remarkable. I can say with confidence that her presence on Canada's highest court is an inspiration to the next generation of legal professionals like myself. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming the Honorable Michelle Obonsawin to today's virtual Pink Tea. Thank you.
Well, thank you for these wonderful introductions. It is a great pleasure and honor to speak to you today from Musqueam land, Madam Justice. Like many Indigenous people throughout Canada, I was elated when you were appointed to the Supreme Court. I read with interest both your questionnaire that was made public and the questions from various members of Parliament. So I know you've been asked and answered this question many times, but now that you've been sitting with the Supreme Court for 2 years and have had more time to reflect, how does being an Indigenous woman inform your work as a justice?
So I'll start off by thanking Cleesh for those beautiful words, and also to Francis for the land acknowledgement. I do appreciate it. I'm coming to you from Ottawa and ceded Anishinaabe Algonquin territory. So to answer the question, being an Indigenous Franco-Ontarian person, it really nourishes the background actually nourishes just how I see things. It's the lens through which I look at files. It doesn't mean particularly that I will, because I'm an Indigenous person, when we hear an Indigenous matter, that I'm always going to make a determination in a certain way. Because at the end of the day, we, as the 9 justices who sit on the Supreme Court of Canada, we make our determination based on the case as it's presented to us. So we don't do the lobbying, etc. So for me, my standard answer basically is it's the lens through which I see the cases that come before me. I think it's unique to myself, such as my other colleagues who have various backgrounds. They have their own unique perspective also.
Hmm. Well, since the 1970s, enrollment numbers in law school for Indigenous people have been climbing. And yet I think most Indigenous people can still point to the few trailblazers in our communities who first became lawyers. So it's still relatively new to see Indigenous people in the law profession and achieving success, and partly why so many of us were elated to see you appointed to the Supreme Court. So what inspired you to become a lawyer?
It's really a funny little story because I'm asked that all the time. And I have to say, when I was 9 years old, I just decided I was going to be a lawyer. I told my parents I come from a very small community just outside of Sudbury, which is definitely a blue collar town. My father worked in the mines, as with my uncles, etc. My mom was a teacher. And so there weren't any professionals in my family. It wasn't the norm. And to be honest, I don't know. I always say that it was just a calling. I decided when I was 9, I was going to be a lawyer. My parents were shocked, but I was really fortunate. They supported my dream from my childhood into adulthood. And I was really fortunate.
I have a sister who also became a lawyer, so I know how grueling law school is. Was there anything that sort of kept you going through the process?
I was really fortunate because we had the Aboriginal Law Students Association at the University of Ottawa. And many of you may know we have the French common law and the English common law program. So it's a very large program. So within both the French and English program, we had our association that had been created by Professor Larry Chatelain at the time. And I was fortunate because I was able to meet with my new friends who I made in law school who are Indigenous like me. We could talk about matters. And also in the French common law program, we were a little tight knit group of just a little over 50 students. So through those two groups, I was really, I had a really good support system. I was fortunate.
Community makes a difference, right? I mean, this is
Mhm.
this is what we say all the time, but
Absolutely.
yeah. Well, and so on to your other intellectual community. So you did a PhD. I mean, a PhD is a huge undertaking. I know also from
Yeah.
experience, and I have to ask, like, what inspired you to pursue a PhD while also being a judge and a mother?
It all started from my work at the Royal Ottawa Healthcare Group because it is a teaching hospital. So for those of you that aren't aware, it's a specialized mental health facility in Ottawa and Brockville, Ontario. And because of the close affiliation with the University of Ottawa, a lot of my clients who were psychiatrists and psychologists did a lot of research. And when they saw that I had an interest in research, they put me into the fold. And I was fortunate to be able to do a master's program part time at Osgoode Hall. But then afterwards, I thought that it was something that I wanted to pursue further research. I had a really big interest on the whole aspect of Gladue principles and if they can apply in the forensic mental health system. And that's the criminal justice system that applies to are not criminally responsible and unfit accused, and whether or not those principles can apply. So when I was the year before I was named to the Superior Court of Justice in September 2016, I actually did my coursework for a period of a year until I was named in May of 2017 to the court. And during that period of time, in the first 2 years, I really I took a step back from the PhD program because I was in a new position as a judge. It was a huge endeavor, and I really wanted to be comfortable as being a judge. So after 2 years, I felt I had my bearings, and I decided to go back to the program full time. So I was a judge by day, a PhD student by weekend, and a mom all in between. So it was, I have to say, really important to be able to manage my time well throughout those 3 years it took me to complete my PhD program.
Well, that's really impressive to do all of that and a PhD at the same time in 3 years. It's-
It was a lot of work.
Yeah. So, I mean, now that you're a justice, how does your scholarly work inform your work as a justice?
It's been really helpful because on the Supreme Court of Canada, we are not just hearing more of a territorial or regional cases. The cases that come before us, with the exception of the criminal matters that come as of right in front of us, the other files they have of national importance, and there's a lot of research. And so for me, I find it nourishing. It's amazing to be able to use the litigator capabilities I had from being a litigator throughout my career, my trial judge experience, which is extremely important when I'm looking at prior trial decisions, why they do that. But then the academic side of it, of how can we apply this also on a cross Canada basis. So it has really helped me think also more well-rounded. And at times I think it's outside the box.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible to have somebody with your intellectual background serving as a Supreme Court justice. So why did you decide uh, to serve on the Supreme Court?
Well, when we found out, the announcement came out of the Prime Minister's office that Justice Moldaver was going to retire early. So I believe his original retirement date was of December 23rd, 2022, and he was retiring as of September 1st. And I did appreciate that because that would give the new justice the capability to start with the new session and not midway through a session. And at that time, I had consulted my mentor, the Honorable Murray Sinclair, to ask him, did he think that this was an appropriate time in my career to actually put forward my name and my application throughout the process? And I wanted to talk to him about, did he think that Canada was ready to actually name an Indigenous person to the Supreme Court of Canada? It is a first, and I wanted to bounce that around with him, and we had a really great conversation. He encouraged me, as did others, and I decided to go ahead and throw my hat in the ring, or throw my ring in the hat. No, I said that. See, the francophone in me is coming out. Sorry, I mixed that up. So the first time was right.
That's right. It's the hat in the ring.
That's right.
Well, I mean, that's a beautiful story because I think as Indigenous people, we have elders in our communities, but as professionals, we also have elders in our professional communities, and seeking out their advice and guidance is, really important, because I think that's such an important question about whether Canada is ready to have an Indigenous Supreme Court justice. So
And I'm glad they were.
yeah, exactly. Me too. So what is the best thing about being a justice on the Supreme Court? I mean, you are in a group of a very small group of people who will ever get to be in that position.
It's amazing. I have to say, I come to work every day. I work with brilliant people on this court. I'm fortunate to be part of the decision-making process that impacts Canadians everywhere throughout Canada with these nationwide decisions that we make. The other favorite part of my job is I get to do a series of speaking engagements, go out in the community. I think it's important to, as our Chief Justice has done much of since he's become chief, to demystify the work of our court. And how do we do that? But to go out and meet with Canadians. And I go and speak a lot at different universities, but every time I go to a university, I also ask the host university to give me a name of 3 different high schools. And I do a bit of research and I pick one of the high schools, and then I go meet students also at the high school. So because I think that's where the knowledge starts, and when the ideas percolate about a future, it starts at the high school level. by the time they're in university, it's more set in stone. So I like to go to the base also.
What kind of questions do high school students ask you?
I have all kinds of the range. So I get the funny questions that you could expect, how much money do you make? And then I
Right.
get the questions about, well, how does it work when you work with 8 other people? A lot of people want to know, what do we talk about after we meet? They want to know, what kind of cases do we hear? What language do we speak? I get that asked a lot because now for the first time, all 9 justices are fluently bilingual. So the answer is, it's the language of our choice that we get to speak. So it's a series of different questions. Some of them will ask me for advice and tips on how I got to where I am now. I get questions about my dogs because a lot of times I tell people that I have 4 dogs. Yes, we're crazy with 4 dogs, but so it's a lot of fun because you never know with youth what you're going to get. And I like the challenge of just having a chat with them, because for me it's more, the Q&As are the best than to give a speech. They don't want to listen to me talk. It's much more fun to be interactive.
Wow, I mean, that must be such a gift for high schoolers to hear you speak. I mean, when I was growing up, and I'm sure this is true for you too, the Supreme Court justices were a very remote group of people. I wouldn't have
Yeah.
even thought that I could ask them questions. So that's a really, that's really amazing. Um, and I wondered, actually, when you were talking about language, I had read that you are taking language classes in your Indigenous language, Abenaki language. So I'm wondering if you're still able to keep up with that with all of the many things on your plate.
I'm actually restarting this afternoon because what had happened, the silver lining of the pandemic for me was when everything went online, I was able to take Abenaki language courses 3 nights a week for 6 hours. So it was amazing because from January of 2020 till June 2020, I took those courses. I was diligent about it 3 times a week. And then I went to Middlebury College in the States online to do a 2-week intensive program. And then Odanak, my First Nation, started doing them online. But since my appointment to the Supreme Court, I'll be 100% off it. Uh, honest, I've been lacking where I haven't taken the time enough in my schedule to try to organize to take the classes. So today, with the instructor who teaches at Odanak First Nation, I'm starting lessons that he and I are going to organize according to my schedule, because I find that I haven't spoken enough in the last year and a half, and I'm starting to lose certain things. So I really want to make sure that I keep what I've learned and to continue moving ahead and learning my language.
That's amazing. Amazing that you're able to fit it into your schedule. I would love to be learning my language too, and I haven't figured out how to get to the Zoom lessons that
It
my
is
nation
possible.
offers. Yeah, exactly. Is there anything that surprises you about being a Supreme Court justice?
I was really surprised but impressed with the machine, all the people that work in the background, because it's curious, how do judges get ready? So every office, we have a team. So I have 3 clerks that are all lawyers. When by the time normally they get to me, I have an assistant, I have a court support officer. So in my office, I have a team that helps me prepare for cases, but not just from my own office. There's a whole machine of, when we do events, there's a whole protocol team. There's a whole team of records that organizes our files. We have legal branch that gives us legal advice as we're writing certain things if we have questions. So the registry office, all these different components behind the scenes that people don't see, they really help us to get ready to sit on that bench. So it's not a solo mission where I'm doing everything by myself. I have a really great team in my office, but the court itself has an amazing support system in the background that people don't really see or hear about. So I want to share with you that we're really fortunate to have a team that supports us like we do at the Supreme Court.
Oh, that's amazing. I want to turn now to some questions from journalism students at Concordia University in Montreal. First, I want to introduce Dana Hatchway, who will actually introduce herself and ask her question.
Okay.
Hey, I'm Dana Hashway. I'm a student journalist at Concordia University in Montreal. And my question pertains to a questionnaire that you completed for Department of Justice Canada, where you said, "I would like to ensure that the stigma associated with mental health is reduced and one day completely eliminated. This applies not only to the general population, but also to the judiciary." So can you explain what mental health stigmas exist at the judiciary level and why it's important that they be addressed?
Well, for the stigma itself, I think it's really important because as Canadians, 50% of Canadians are touched either directly or indirectly by mental illness and mental health issues. So I think that there's such a stigma surrounding talking freely and open about it because it's not like when you have a broken arm and you're wearing a cast. So everyone knows you broke your arm and that's why you have a cast. However, if you're touched by mental illness, it's not really evident. And sometimes, as a symptom of the mental illness, it'll lead you to act a certain way, do certain things, feel really unwell. And I think that there was really an issue, especially in workplaces, about how mental illness was perceived. And I think that we've seen an evolution. I think that we've made amazing strides, even since I started practicing law. And I've seen a great evolution. There are different corporations that have really great campaigns to support it. And on the judiciary itself, I think that in the law per se, it's something that we're talking about more. So in the last year, Invested Sherbrooke, along with the Canadian Bar Association, did a research that showed that there's a strong impact of mental health issues on the legal profession as a whole that touch our students who are in law, our lawyers, and our judges. So it's something that no one could shy away from. It touches everyone directly or indirectly. And I think that the more we talk about it, the less the stigmatization is going to continue. And normally when I speak at different events, I speak to the three different crowds. So the first crowd are the non-believers. And for those that don't believe, I always say, go ahead. I encourage you to learn more about mental illness and the impact that it has on individual, the symptoms, the medications, because with knowledge comes understanding. The second group that I always address are those that are indirectly touched or that are the supporters that of those that are touched by mental illness. And I always encourage everyone to check in on our friends, family, close family members, because sometimes just saying, "Are you okay? Hey, do you want to go have a coffee and have a chat?" Those little things are just one thing that can make the individual feel like they're heard and that someone's checking in on them. And the third, those are the individuals that are directly touched by mental illness. And I encourage everyone who's touched by mental illness, who is afraid to talk about it or afraid to seek treatment because of the stigmatization, not to let that stop you, because treatment is necessary and it's important. And I really hope that if you're touched by mental illness or directly like that, that you go ahead and you seek the help that you need.
Yeah, really powerful message. And I guess I wonder, now that we've lived through the pandemic and we're looking at a bigger challenge when it comes to mental health, but more awareness, whether or not you think that, gives us a different sort of take on it, and whether there's more openness to discussing it since we've all lived through this really difficult period.
I think it's something that is more discussed, especially in our youth. I find I have teenagers, young men who are young adults, and I really saw it as a parent of my children who went through the pandemic, being online, all the schooling online, the lack of friendships, the lack of contact with friends, and it did have an impact on our children's mental health. And as a parent, I was able to see firsthand that it's not always easy to have access to mental health services, even if we have employee assistance program, etc. At the height of the pandemic, those services were rare and were really difficult to access. So I think that it's something that is more discussed, but it's definitely we still have a ways to go.
Yeah, like you, I have teenagers, and I just find they're so much more open to having these discussions and awareness of their peers.
Absolutely.
And and perhaps even a greater awareness of community and what difference that makes to getting through difficult times in life.
Yeah.
All right, I want to turn to the second question, which is from Ava LeBlanc.
Hello, my name is Ava. I'm a student of history, Indigenous studies, and political science at McGill University. I'm also standing Buffalo, Dakota, although I grew up in Montreal. And I'm very interested in topics relating to decolonization, especially as it relates to Indigenous women and queer people, as well as the topic of coalition between different marginalized identities. And I just want to start by thanking Justice Abonsoen for allowing me to ask a question today. So my question is, do you think indigenizing or decolonizing the judicial system can have positive consequences beyond the lives of Indigenous peoples in Canada? And who can we reach and whose lives can be improved by dismantling these structures of settler colonialism? So thank you very much.
Wow, that's quite the intense question. I'll try to answer it as best as I can. I think that we're making strides with our public institution as a judiciary and just the judicial system as a whole. I think that a perfect example is Akwesasne First Nation that has started its own program of justice that serves the community firsthand on site with specific files. And I think that really makes a difference, because when you appear in front of a judge and it's your peers, I think that at times there could be the feeling of a better understanding by those that are parties that appear in front of the court system. I think that that's definitely a positive step in the right decision. I've talked about Gladue principles in the past, and those stem out of there was an amendment to the Criminal Code in 1995-96 by the Parliament of Canada that added a component that required all sentencing judges to take into consideration the individual background of the Indigenous accused that appears in front of us for sentencing. And I think that this is a component that's extremely important, because we need to be able to understand about the background and how our people have been touched by colonization, by residential school, by the intergenerational trauma, and just about the individual, him or herself or themselves, that appear in front of us. So all that information, I think, is essential when we're looking at the component of sentencing. But I think that we have also First Peoples courts at the different provincial and territorial levels that really have made an improvement. And when it comes to the whole question of different cultures and how do we go about it, I think that it's really important to be culturally sensitive of those that appear in front of us. And I think, like every Canadian, we want to be able to see those like us reflected in the judiciary. And I think that there's been a great improvement on that. And because we have Chief Justice Len Marchand, who's been confirmed as the new Chief Justice of the Court of Appeal of British Columbia. There are different judges. There's Justice George in the Court of Appeal of Ontario. So with time, we're taking our place. And I think that it's something that's definitely positive. I think it speaks great to reconciliation, and it's a very good step forward. So I don't know if I've answered that as much as our friend would have liked, but if there's any other part you think that I should cover, let me know.
Well, I really appreciate you mentioning Justice Len Marchand, because that was a wonderful thing here for many in BC. The Marchand family has been well known since his father was also a senator and long-serving, public servant, really, that made a big impact in BC. And so, yeah, I think it's a really broad question and a really good one, because it can go in many directions, thinking about what kind of positive impact there can be for Indigenous people, especially since, right, it's been 30 years since the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples came out in 1996. In fact, I was just teaching the other day with RCAP, because it really is the beginning of many commission reports, the Truth
Yeah.
and Reconciliation Commission, Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls Commission reports, right?
Yeah.
That draw attention to how overrepresented Indigenous people are in the criminal justice system. And I'm wondering, does this remain an issue today? I mean, this is 2024, a long time past many of these reports, but especially RCAP.
Unfortunately, it still remains an increasing problem that has to be dealt with, because when we were looking at RCAP and we had the TRC, Missing and Murdered, we had the Vien Commission, which is the most recent one out in Quebec with regard to the Val d'Or police. So this is a problem that continues. As Indigenous people, we are approximately 5% of the Canadian population, but if we look at our numbers, for example, I think our women are close to 50% of the incarceration rates. Our men are a bit less in the 30s. It's ridiculous when you think we're 5% of a population, but our numbers are so high in the incarceration rates. And when the Supreme Court of Canada looked at Gladue in the late 90s, talked about all the issues surrounding incarceration with regards to our people, and talked about the hope that looking at the amendment of the criminal code with 718(2)E, that judges now had an obligation to look at the personal background circumstances of the Indigenous accused and try to find a sentence that is really fit, excuse me, for that person, that we would see a decrease in the numbers. But unfortunately, our court looked at this again in 2012 with the Ipili decision. And the court said it was shocked to see that the numbers continue to increase. And again, with Dr. Zinger's, the correctional investigators report of last year, the numbers keep going up. So it remains an issue that I'm not sure what the answer is, how to deal with it. There's a societal issue, there's a criminal justice issue, but unfortunately, it's not getting better. It's actually going in the other direction.
Wow. Someone from the audience actually just asked what RCAP is,
Oh,
the Royal
sure.
Commission on Aboriginal People.
Yeah.
This was a first report of its kind that really offered an analysis of colonialism in Canada. And as Justice Obonson pointed out, right, laid out this really this understanding of what Indigenous people had been experiencing in the criminal justice system. And I think really laid the groundwork for a lot of the reforms and changes that have been made. But it is really disturbing to hear that things aren't changing, even with the reforms and changes that have been made. There's probably many kinds of explanations we could point to, but certainly the long tendrils of colonialism and what that looks like in various communities and various families, plays a huge role. RCAP told us that, right, back in 1996. I think there was one more question here. Oh, I guess it's already been answered. I just answered it. That was the question. So I want to talk about heroes. Often people are asked who their heroes are, and I can imagine that down the road there will be young people who will point to you as a hero. And so I'm wondering who your heroes are, and whether they're legal or whether they're from community or whether they're from history.
My grandmother, my maternal grandmother, who's not Indigenous, but who played a huge part of my life, was one of my first heroes. She was a woman who was born in 1929. Her name is Jacqueline Larocque, and she had a huge impact on my life growing up. I'm an only child. My grandmother only had 2 grandchildren, including myself, and we spent a lot of time together. And I was really fortunate because 5 years ago, we moved her from the Sudbury area to the Ottawa area, and she spent her last days here with us. And she actually saw me named to the Supreme Court of Canada before she passed away. So I was really fortunate. And when I was sworn into this court, I was gifted an eagle feather by Elder Gilbert White Duck of Kitigan-Zibi. And I actually named her Jacqueline in honor of my grandmother. So Jacqueline is with me in court, in my court office every day, and it reminds me of my grandmother. So she was really my first hero, and throughout my life, because she was so modern for a woman who was born in 1929. She was extremely modern, and she had always told me, Michelle, pursue your dreams, get your education, be an independent woman, don't rely on anyone, rely on your own and on yourself, and be courageous. And she taught me those things, and I really have followed her advice throughout my life. And then afterwards, when I got into the law, the heroes, well, Claude Leroux Dubé, who was a force to be reckoned with, the second woman named to the Supreme Court of Canada, a Franco-Quebecer. I used to read her decisions, and they were so impactful. Of course, Chief Justice Beverly McLaughlin as our first female and Chief Justice of our court. Murray Sinclair, who I talked about, who has been amazing and has really been a beacon to help guide me in the last 5 years throughout my career, especially. And there are others. I've been fortunate throughout my life to have had different mentors throughout, and they've evolved. It's not always been the same people. And I've always said I've stood on the shoulders of giants to get where I am today. I didn't get here by myself. I definitely got here through the support of my husband, who has been by my side when we were in law school, to my family, and to all my other mentors. So I've been really fortunate.
Wow. Wow. That's a wonderful list of people, beginning with your grandmother. That's incredible. My father has just moved into assisted living in the Yukon, and it is an amazing thing to be with the elders in our family who have been so influential, especially right up until the end. And I think it's beautiful that she got to move to Ottawa with you.
Can I just add, I forgot someone, and it's a cousin of ours, Evelyn Obamswin, and she was involved in the change for C31, and to have a change for Indigenous women, for our children to be recognized, because there's still that issue of the discrimination about who gets recognized. So of course the male line, my children have status, but my direct cousins, because it's a female line, their children don't have status. So Evelyn Obamswin, who was a leader in our First Nation, and my cousin, she was someone who I remember when I was in law school, I went and met with her because I wrote a major paper about her and the changes with C31. So I just wanted to mention her because I forgot. She was really important also.
Mm. Yes. When I teach about Bill C31, and I always mention Sharon MacIver, who's the MacIver decision was another important decision that opened up the way for women to include all of their family. I think that's really important and amazing that somebody from your family participated in the original resistance and change to the patriarchal system that was put in place and often excluded women and excluded their families. So that's really wonderful to hear. I just have a final question for you. I'm sure you get asked this a lot, but what advice would you give to young female lawyers and to law students?
I think the first piece of advice is to be true to yourself. My grandmother instilled that in me. I was always true to myself, and I've always been throughout my career, even now at the Supreme Court of Canada. I am who I am. You take me as I am. I'm not going to change to fit into a mold. So I think to be true to oneself is really important. To be persistent, not to take no for an answer. When I was in grade 12, I had a guidance counselor who, when I told him I was going to be a lawyer, he said, well, you come from a little small French town in Northern Ontario, you're likely not going to become a lawyer. And I got mad. I'm like, no, you know what? Watch me. And when I was named to the court, I told my mother, I wonder if you saw the news. So, but at the end of the day, I think what's really important, be yourself, make sure that you're persistent, Make sure also you guard your reputation, because that was one of the best pieces of advice I got from my mentors when I started practicing. We only have one reputation, and once you lose it, you don't get it back. So you have to be mindful of that at throughout all the different stages of your life. And I have to say, at times my sons are tired of me always saying, be careful what you're writing on social media, be careful what you text. When you're looking for a job, these things come out. So your reputation is essential. And once you lose it, you don't get it back. So to always be mindful and to treat others with respect, that in the way that we want to be treated. And I try to be mindful of that because I think it's really important.
Yeah, so important and so challenging now for young people, because they're in this world where, the knee-jerk reaction is to post, comment, say things that you might not actually even say in person, that kind of feels freewheeling when you're online. So
Absolutely.
yeah. I mean, would you recommend that students go into the law profession? I think that's also an interesting question for a lot of young people who are thinking about directions to go.
I absolutely love the law. I've been asked, would you change anything? The answer is absolutely not. So I highly recommend it because this is a profession where you can make an impact on lives. You can make an impact on those that are your clients. You can make societal changes. It's a role where, depending on where you're at, you could do lobbying. So it's a role that allows you to do a series of different things and you make it what you want it to be. So I highly encourage those. I have to say, as a woman litigator, it's not been easy. It's difficult at times to juggle a family, children, a spouse, just everything, your work, your obligations. It's not easy. Work-life balance, I'll be honest, I don't have the solution. At times I'm great at it, at other times I'm not. But I've found it to be a very fulfilling career, and I highly encourage anyone who's interested in the law to pursue their dream because I just have great things to say about it. It's really been a fulfilling career for me.
Hmm. Oh, it's wonderful to hear. And, for many people, especially Indigenous people, the court decisions make an enormous, long-term impact on our lives. So I think having someone like you from your background at the very top court in the country is really important. And I'm grateful that you're
Thank you.
there. I'm grateful that you recommend the law profession. I mean, a lot of people ask me, should I become a journalist? And I'm like, well, you really got to think very carefully. It's not the same thing as it once was, but
Yeah.
Certainly the law profession has a lot more stability going on for it than people who go into the news business.
Yeah, things have changed with social media.
Yeah, it really has. It's changed in so many ways. So yeah, I've really loved speaking with you today. And I wondered if there's anything else that you wanted to share with our audience. A lot of people who are with us today are interested in women's rights, but also interested in the very questions that we had from Ava around decolonizing, so much of the systems in Canada which haven't served Indigenous people very well.
Well, there are a couple of things. I just want people to be mindful about what I said, the three groups and mental health. When I have the opportunity, I always talk about mental illness and how it impacts everyone in society, directly or indirectly. And I am just encouraging everyone to continue to talk about it because, as I've said, the more we talk about it, the destigmatization will continue. And I think it's really important. The other thing I want to say to the youth or the younger generation online is if you have a dream, pursue it. Don't let anyone tell you you cannot do it. And persistence is the key. And persistence and just working hard is really the key to success. And if you have a dream and you're up to it, I am sure that you could pursue it and be successful. So especially for young women, I think it's important for us to go out and take our place in society.
Yeah, those are powerful words, especially coming from you. And it's something I often remind my own daughters about, that this is a really different world than I grew up in, than my mother grew up in, than my grandmother grew up in. We've really got more options in front of us than ever. And so pursuing your dreams becomes really, really important. Well, I'm so deeply appreciative of your time today and of speaking with us.
Oh, Ulini.
Yeah.
Yes, and me too. I always hate to break in, but unfortunately now is the time that I must do so. But these conversations, of course, are essential to figuring out how we all live together as treaty people. But now is the time for us to say thank you to everybody, including our guests,
Thank you very much.
special guests. And I'm hoping that you might have a teacup or a glass or a mug to say thank you very especially, very intently to the two leaders we met mainly on screen today, plus the three young'uns. So first of all, to Justice Obonsawin, your candor and your encouragement, your optimism is much, much appreciated. We'll have many, many wrinkles, as will your, or ripples, I should say, as will your wise and thoughtful decisions. Already people are starting to look at the Supreme Court as an enlivening and enabling body rather than something that always restricts and says you can't do, you can't be, whatever. And that's partly because of the fact that people like yourself are now appointed to the Supreme Court, but also that you speak in such a way that encourages the rest of us to learn a little more about the role of a justice and the role of the Supreme Court in Canada. And so I would like to toast and join everybody to join me in toasting to Justice Obonsawin, an incredible justice of the Supreme Court of Canada.
Hooray. Justice
Cheers, thank
Obonsawin.
you.
May your time on the Supreme Court be challenging, because you obviously have the ability to deal with difficult questions, Justice Obonsawin, and also to explain them to us. And I'm sure people are going to be reading your decisions and hopefully some of your, do they call it, dissenting decisions?
Those happen from times to time.
Yes, well, do continue, because as you know, it encourages other people to think about other things in other ways. That it doesn't have to be the same thing, the same way, the same time, the same person, whatever. That we have to take into consideration a lot of facts and context before we absolutely decide on something. So thank you very, very much. And I'm, as Cleesh said, so thrilled that there are 5 women sitting on the Supreme Court of Canada, and very grateful to the 4 men that are allowing these 5 women to bloom, to blossom. And our second toast, of course, must go to the amazing guest host today, who led us through a pretty complicated, but a very moving and a very impactful discussion with Justice Obonsawin. You brought out a number of issues that are important both to citizens, to journalists, to students, to the law, Candis. And you certainly epitomized what an excellent journalist could be, should be, as well as an excellent role model as a professor, and how lucky the students are at UBC to have you. And I'm so glad we've got you on tape today, and we'll be able to share this with others. And so if we could raise a teacup or a mug or a glass to say thank you very much. A toast to Candis Callison, an outstanding leader too.
Thank you so much. It's been such a wonderful pleasure to have this conversation. And as I began it with, I was, so elated when Justice Obonsawin was appointed. It's really an honor to be here.
Well, and we were very pleased when you said yes too, Professor Callison. And wasn't it fascinating to meet these 3 young women? First of all, Cleesh, who is doing her first year law at McGill. What a future Cleesh has. And then to be followed up by 2 very different but very equally important questions raised by first Ava, or first Dana, and then Ava. So I wondered if we might have a toast to these three young leaders and encourage them to continue to be leaders. Thank you. And now I'm going to ask Justice Obansawan and the professor just to mute their mics and to stop their videos just for a little bit while I bring you some Famous Five Foundation news. And lots have been going on since we last got together. The first thing is I'd like to acknowledge, and the next slide, please, I have to tell my colleague, that our sculptor for the Women Are Persons monuments in Ottawa and Calgary has just been granted Indigenous status. Oh, yay, Barbara Patterson, a proud member of the Métis of Canada. She has produced an incredible monument for us, as we say, both in Calgary and Olympic Plaza and in Ottawa, outside the front door of the Senate of Canada. And we encourage you all to go and sit in Emily's chair. That was Barbara's brilliance of how to make the monument interactive. And so sit on the chair and say thank you to the Famous Five and the other women who've built Canada. Secondly, discuss with the Famous Five where you disagree with them, because like all of us or some of us, they weren't perfect. And you've had now 25 years to sit in Emily's chair and to tell them what would be a better idea. And then most of all, before you leave Emily's chair and the group of the Famous Five, pledge to be a nation builder, for you to do your part too. Next slide, please. One of the other great pieces of news is the Famous Five Foundation has been honored to receive vice-regal patronage from the extraordinary Governor General of Canada, Mary Simon. Thrilling. This means that our mission vision, our actions, our values dovetail with that of this Governor General. And so we are very grateful. McGuish, thank you so much, Governor General Mary Simon, for acknowledging us in this way. And since 1979, the Governor General has awarded her Persons Awards to women and girls across Canada who have significantly contributed to improving the lives of girls and women. And the nomination process has just opened up. So please nominate somebody before June 30th. Contact us, go to the Governor General's site, go to Women and Gender Equality Canada, and you will see all the information there. It's an easy process. And best of all, next slide, please. The Governor General is going to be coming to Calgary to give out these awards as part of the 95th anniversary of the Persons case. What the Famous Five began, we continue. So this will be wonderful. So join us in Calgary on October 18th, 2024, the 95th, and help celebrate what is a major human rights victory. And it will be part of a pink tea, as we're having today, but it will be in person. And we also want to encourage everybody to hold a pink tea where they are. So we're hoping 95 pink teas will be registered with the Famous Five Foundation. And this is a gathering of women and good-hearted men who want to do their part for building a better Canada and for acknowledging that with the Persons case, we have the first significant international declaration of equality. Yes, Canadians, 5 women from Alberta caused that to happen. And if you have a pink tea, you will be honoring the principle of equality and also for reconciliation. And lastly, I would like to thank the federal government, because just recently they approved the provision of birth control, free birth control, as part of our Medicare. And our thanks goes to the Canadian Medical Association, the Association of OB-GYNs, and to various advocates like Calgary's Dr. Rupinder Tour. So now when you need birth control, you simply go to your doctor or a medical clinic, and the prescription will be provided, the birth control will be provided for you free of charge. And our last announcement is, of course, about our next pink tea. And that's going to be with Charlotte Gray, a remarkable best-selling author, historian. And she has written 2 books, of course. She's written a number of books, I think about 9 or 10 now. But the 2 that are of most interest to us are the one that she did about 10 years ago on Nellie McClung as part of the Extraordinary Canadians section, and her recent one called Passionate Mothers, Powerful Sons. And this is the lives of Jenny Churchill and Sarah Roosevelt. And their sons, of course, are Winston Churchill and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So please join us on Friday, May the 17th at 2 o'clock Mountain Daylight Time for an in-person pink tea or a virtual pink tea with Charlotte Gray. And now I would like our last toast to include all of us. So I would call back, please, Professor Callison and Justice Obanswin to join us again and to say that we're leaders too, and to encourage you. Now, they've shown you today, and you've heard today, what incredible leaders these two women are, and the three young women that we met today. So we'd like you to take a pledge, and that says, to me, I'm a leader too. So you're recognizing that your leadership is needed too. So shoulders back, deep breath, and in a strong, clear voice, please say to me, and you may want to do your teacup too, to me, I'm a leader too. I'll count down from 5, and then we'll say, to me, I'm a leader too, and toast ourselves. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. To me, I'm a leader too. Remember, the famous 5 spirit is within you. Continue to feel equal to high and splendid braveries. Thank you, Justice Obanswin. Thank you very much, Professor Callison. It's been a wonderful, wonderful virtual pink tea, something we will think about and be talking about for a long, long time. And we look forward to everybody joining us on May the 17th. Merci.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Have you ever had a conversation with someone and felt like they weren't listening? Like maybe they didn't even care about what you had to say? Not so long ago, life was a bit like that for women in Canada. They weren't allowed to vote. And if they spoke out and voiced their opinions, they could even be sent to jail. It was a time when women had more fear and less freedom, more rules and fewer rights. But 5 courageous Albertan women came together and changed it all. How, you might ask? Over a cup of tea. That's right, a cup of tea. But more on that in a minute. Almost 100 years ago, Emily Murphy, Irene Parlby, Nellie McClung, Louise McKinney, and Henrietta Muir Edwards were fed up with the way things were. Emily Murphy was the first female magistrate in Canada and wanted to be appointed to the Senate. But since she was a woman, she wasn't eligible. The law at the time said it was a position for persons, a word which somehow didn't include women. The women who would become known as the Famous 5 set out to change that. But since women were strongly discouraged from getting together and talking about politics, the Famous 5 set up what they called pink teas. The name was a great disguise. People assumed that they were just having dainty tea parties, but in reality, they were planning their strategy to move forward gender equality in Canada. All the planning and work that occurred during the pink teas led to the Famous 5's first petition to the Supreme Court of Canada. It was not to be that easy. Their petition was rejected. But they weren't giving up. They decided to approach the highest possible court authority at the time, the Privy Council of England. And on October 18th, 1929, an amazing thing happened. The Famous 5's petition led to the ruling that women were included as persons under law. These 5 courageous women changed the course of history in Canada and the Commonwealth and paved the way for women to be considered equal in all aspects of life. Generations later, their actions continue to inspire Canadian women to be ambitious, adventurous, and famous. Today, the Famous 5 Foundation works to create a society where every voice is heard, valued, and has the power to challenge and conquer injustice.